Hey everybody, it's your girl Planet Tot on deck. I hope you guys are having a great day, afternoon, and or evening whenever you guys are seeing this. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you guys are new here, welcome. Nice to see you. How you do? Drop your name in the comments so I can say a special hello to you. If you are returning, welcome back. You already know I love you guys super much. Anyhow, so today we're going to be discussing the case of Jean-Baptiste Denis. Okay, this is a case that took place in 1667, and you guys won't believe what I was able to find out. If you guys want to jump into this true crime story time with your girl, all you got to do is stay tuned. Okay, somehow I knew you guys would come back. So without further ado, let's jump right into this story time. Now I'm going to take you guys back in time, way back in time, and I'm going to take you guys to a place called Paris in France. Let's see what information we find out today. Okay, so 350 years ago, a doctor performed the first human blood transfusion where a sheep was involved. So let that soak in for you. Let that soak in. The first human transfusion, blood transfusion, where a sheep was involved. So early scientists thought that the quantities of an animal, a lamb, okay, for example, could be transmitted to humans in blood form. Now, what this essentially means is when people, so the purpose of people having blood transfusions, as you guys may or may not know, is if people have like some kind of medical ailments that they're unable to get cures from in any other way of medicine, sometimes they can be cured by having a blood transfusion from one human being to another that helps in layman's terms, to help the bad cells get stronger with other people's good cells, right? So back in 1667, they were testing blood transfusions on human beings and animal blood. Now, how do you guys think this is going to turn out? You guys go ahead, drop something in the comments right now, and let me know, what do you guys speculate can possibly happen as a result of this? Okay, so again, for those who are, unaware of what a blood transfusion is, it's the process of transferring the blood of a person into the veins of another person for health and restoration purposes. Just to make sure that we are on the page about what a blood transfusion is, because we are going to speak about it at different times throughout this true crime story times, okay? So, a man by the name of Jean-Baptiste Denis was born in October 1635, okay, in Paris, France. Initially, his birth had gone unnoticed and undocumented by the officials. Now, you guys got to keep in mind that back in the day, 1635, hundreds of years ago, okay, back in the day, things were a lot different, right? Women were having babies, wherever they could, not necessarily in the traditional way that people would think of to this day and time, like by way of hospitals and stuff like that. No, they were more so having babies at home, which was more common. And then not just at home, but also like in the field, on the farm, on different parts of the land, not necessarily where there can be a documented record of who was having which baby and when. Right? So this particular guy, Jean, when he was originally born, he wasn't even accounted for in the city, state, country that he was in as a living human being at all at that point, okay? So like I said, there was tons of people who were having babies everywhere. And hospitals at that time were considered to be a place for the rich, okay? So if you were on the right financial tax bracket, or you were considered a person of upper and prestigious background, then it would be more plausible for you to have a birth in the hospital, unless you specifically requested to have it at home, like with the what do you call those, the nurses. I'll put it in, okay? But so yeah, this guy, he was unaccounted for. Now, one fun fact that I found out is that statistics show that between the 1600s and the 1700s, 1 to 1.5% of women who were actually even giving birth during that time, they died. So they died during childbirth. So that also explains. So what it makes me question is, of all the people who were never perhaps accounted for, riddle me this. If you were, were one of those women who were born around that time, let's say, I don't know if they had, I'm sure they always had some kind of age restrictions on who can have kids when or whatever the laws were, right? But just say if you were a person who got pregnant under mysterious circumstances around that time, right? And you had the baby, and you had your baby, and then, you know, there was, you couldn't go to a hospital because, again, you weren't prestigious or wealthy or anything else like that, so you couldn't go to like a standard hospital or something, but you had your baby, and, you know, and the babies, they said a lot of that times, 1 to 1.5% of the women who had babies, they were dead. You know, the babies never survived. So if that were the case, then were those babies, what percentage, I wonder, of those babies were never accounted for, like, at all, like from a statistical standpoint? I don't know. I'm just very analytical, so I'm thinking about a whole bunch of things. But you guys light up the comments and let me know what your thoughts are. So I can't even imagine how it was to be living back in that time at all anyhow. Okay, but articles during that time suggest that Gene, he was born in a modest family. Now, in fact, his father was an artisan who specialized in water pumps. And there's no information that I was able to find on Gene's mother, which is ironic. And then I question, was she one of the people who perhaps didn't make it during childbirth? You know, could she have perished by way of having her son? I don't know, just speculation. But there was nothing that I could find. That was a very long time ago, but there was still nothing that I could find on Gene's mother. So anyhow, so his father, he specialized in water pumps, which was seeing an increase at that time. Water pumps was very popular. I mean, they started becoming very popular during the time that his father was actually working in that field of work. Now, it was also reported that Gene had suffered from asthma, which is what made him passionate about studying medicine and healing. Now, for those of you guys who do not know, asthma is pretty much something, and I will insert the legal term or medical term of asthma, but long and short is when people cannot breathe on their own and they need assistance, they get a shortness of breath, they feel panic, they feel some kind of suffering, they need assistance, they can use a pump to help them to breathe. So because Gene suffered from asthma, or one of the reasons was, that actually led into him wanting to pursue a career in medicine and science. Now remember that for down the line. Y'all light up the comments if you know anybody who has asthma, or if you yourself have asthma and how you're dealing with it. So despite his family's humble origins, he obtained a bachelor's degree in theology at the College of Del Grassens and a medical degree at the Facility of Medicine in Montpellier when he was barely 30 years old. So keep in mind, like, through, much like a lot of people, through different forms of adversity that we face and we go through, some of us are able to pick ourselves up by the boots and keep on going and keep pursuing our career and doing different things that we feel, you know, that we're passionate about, that matters to us in life, and, you know, things that we want to manifest. And fortunately, Gene, he was able to do just that, which was pretty awesome, right? So on June 15th, 1667, Gene then was a prominent French physician. He performed the first documented blood transfusion to a human. Now, before I even go on, you guys have to realize how epic this had to be. In 1667, this guy was the first guy to ever, well, I'll say the ever reported guy, because the thing about it is that so many different things happened throughout that time and era that, you know, that things could have been happening in the medical or scientific community that were not being reported on, especially if people tried things and they didn't go as planned, if you guys know what I mean. Light up the comments if you get where I'm going. Okay, so anyways, now his helpless subject was the person who he performed the transfusion on was an unnamed 15-year-old boy who had been in bad health and was suffering from blood loss. So it came to Gene's attention, you know, they brought it to him, you know, that we have this 15-year-old kid. He, you know, he's suffering from all these different health ailments, and, you know, he has a tremendous amount of blood loss. And, you know, what do you think, based on from your scientific and medical background, what do you think is a great resolution? He said, well, I know of something. Well, it's not 100%, but we can give it a try, and I'm almost certain it'll be a good remedy for what's going on with this boy, right? So they talk to the boy's parents, caregivers, whoever they are, and they agree. They say, okay, yeah, sure. So he performed a blood transfusion on him. This 15-year-old kid was the first kid. first person, right? And reports suggest that the transfusion was a little different than the ones performed in the modern hospitals, as Jean used sheep's blood to perform this blood transfusion on the 15-year-old boy, right? The kid survived, okay? He survived, but it didn't, but the boy didn't get better because of the sheep's blood, reports say. Anyways, the boy didn't get any better because of the sheep's blood, which was likely administered in a fashion that was not, in alliance with the way that it should have been. The likely reason the boy didn't die, is because the blood was submitted in a smaller dosage than what it would have been had it been a different medical professional. Now, you guys, I am summarizing this stuff, but pretty much that's what the medical community were arguing about back then. There was debates going back and forth on the side of the fence on, oh, he submitted a blood transfusion on this 15-year-old boy using a sheep's blood, and the boy survived, right? And then medical professionals were saying, well, the only reason why he didn't die is because he was negligent in the amount that he submitted. He didn't do it right anyway. So it's a bunch of chatter. You guys know how this, it doesn't really matter what field you are in of career or work. There's always somebody who's like your competitor. There's always somebody who's a naysayer who's going to say, well, I would have done this. Well, you should have done that. Well, he didn't think of this. And, so there was a whole bunch of chatter about what should have been done, what could have been done, what wasn't done. Long story short. Okay. So reports also suggest that human blood and sheep's blood are not compatible. Okay. A fun fact, they said, is that human blood is frequently even incompatible with other human blood. Okay, so using a sheep's blood was likely a stretch at that time. If our blood is rarely even compatible with other human beings' blood, then using a sheep's blood was really risky. Really risky. You guys light up the comments and let me know what your thoughts are on that. Okay, so so far, what we have, okay, in this particular true crime is an ambitious member of the science community trying to make a name for himself through introducing new medical procedures, okay? Now, do y'all think you could have been brave enough to be brave and risky enough to try a new procedure like that you did not have a lot of concrete evidence that it would work for the greater good, for the long haul, whatever else? Do you guys think that at a time where medicine was very sketchy, it's always been some form of revolution, depending on, how you saw things, do you think you could be a person who could be a pioneer to step out and say, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to try this thing out and just roll the dice and see how it works? Light up the comments and let me know your thoughts, right? So Jean was a scientist who experienced success after his earlier experiments that were not proven to be a total win. So what will happen is that Jean would do an experiment on somebody, and then the person would go home and they'll say, oh, okay, I can, I'm talking, I'm walking, I'm eating, and then he would write the newspapers allegedly, and say, I had a successful surgery in this or that, or a successful, whatever in this and that. Well, that's not necessarily true though, okay? Then the unexpected for some and unthinkable for others happened. Someone died. Well, if you didn't see that coming, if nobody saw that coming, then you wouldn't have tuned into this true crime story time, because it is a true crime story time. So you knew something was coming. Okay, now let's get into it. Now that someone, okay, who would die by way of one of Jean's experiments was a guy by the name of Anton Maury. Now, he was said to be a mentally ill man who was known in parts of Paris. Now, reports suggest that Jean and his colleagues, wondered if performing a transfusion on Maury could cure him, okay, by replacing his bad blood with good. Now, keep in mind, Maury was mentally ill, so the part that they were trying to cure ultimately was something in his mind that they really couldn't determine what it was. Okay, so they decided that they were thinking, if we give him a blood transfusion, could it cure his mental illness? Now, a little bit about Maury. Maury's married, okay? Maury's married to a woman named Perrine. Okay, I might not be pronouncing that right, but Perrine, okay, and those two are actually, although he spent a lot of his time raising hell in the streets of Paris and, you know, hooping and hollering because he had a mental illness, but this guy was actually married, and he actually lived in a house with his wife, and they were actually kind of well off, to be honest with you. They were not like beggars or anything else like that, but yeah, so that was kind of how he was living his life. It's just that when whatever was going on in his mind that was causing him to have outbursts and be screaming and hollering in the streets, he couldn't dial it back. He could control it, okay? So that's kind of how the two met. Now let's finish this. So, okay, so that someone was Anton Mori, a mentally ill man who was known in Paris. Reports suggest that Jean and his colleagues wondered if performing a transfusion on Mori might cure him by replacing his bad blood with the good blood. Now, and rather than transfusing blood, okay, from an unwilling human, they picked a calf. Now, from an unwilling human, what the reports were suggesting was they decided not to go get another human being and get some of their blood and give it to Maury, because they said nobody at that time would want to give their blood to Maury, okay? So they said instead of begging someone or taking somebody against their will, whatever else, they decided to go get a calf, okay? And they decided to take the blood of a calf to give to Maury. Now, they thought by transfusion the blood of an animal that seemed innocent, a calf seems innocent, okay, and pure, they might be able to counteract the things in the man's own blood that were making him act badly. So you guys are following this theory so far, right? We have a scientist and a doctor. They get together and they see a man who's mentally ill, who was said to be crazy, out hollering in the streets in Paris, right? And they said the way that they perceived that they can cure this man was to transfuse blood, transfer blood from a calf to this man's body, okay? And then because the calf would in theory have pure blood, then he, when he received the blood, would no longer be mentally ill. That was the theory. Light up the comments and let me know you guys thought on that. So luckily for us, science has come a long way. Yeah, today, if people are considered mentally ill, they see a nice charming doctor. The doctor talks to them for 2 to 3 minutes, and then the doctor they have a 2 to 3 minute conversation, and then they prescribe an interesting bottle of pills that can calm them down, right? Right? Okay, y'all hear the sarcasm? Okay, but seriously, medicine has come a long way since 1667, and thank God, okay? But, so, things were a lot different then. Now, long and short of it, let's start here. Maury died, okay? But he did survive the first and the second transfusion. It was said that only 5 or 6 ounces of the calf blood made it to the man, yet Maury began to sweat profusely. Now we're going to backtrack a little bit and see what other articles suggested, because the fact is, well, he didn't just die, and probably not how you think. Let's finish this. So reports suggest that sometime in November 1667, Maury was abducted from the streets of Paris by Jean's guards and tied to a chair. Then he was transfused with blood in front of an audience of noblemen. Y'all following this? Okay. In the hours following the procedure, Maury experienced a fever, nausea, diarrhea, nosebleeds, and urine that was as black as chimney soot. Okay, and an abundance of sweating. Now keep this in mind. That's why I said let's go back a little bit, because reports are suggesting that Maury wasn't a willing participant in this. Okay, now he was out raising hell in the streets of Paris, how he had been doing. Okay, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he's kidnapped. Hands behind his back, things over his eyes. He's kidnapped. What's going on? What's going on? They take your boy Maury off the street. And when he comes back to, or when he's able to see again and perceive reality as he knows it, he's tied down to a chair. Now, there's an audience, a nobleman. Now, noblemen will be considered like prestigious businessmen, prestigious contacts, allies, people of authority and affluence back then, okay? So they all sitting around watching like it's a show at Hunger Games or something else like that. Like, oh, this is what you want us to invest in, or whatever the case may be, right? So they sitting there and they got their full attention. So the nobleman, Jean and his colleagues have the nobleman's full attention because they want to see what's going on. So what did you say was going to happen, and how is this going to work? And so this is what happened, right? So he had all those symptoms. So Maury had all those symptoms and an abundance of sweating, right? So just days later, the man had apparently fully recovered. Okay. So after all that happened, the sweating, the diarrhea, the vomiting, all that stuff, 2 days later, he recovered, or did he? Okay. This was the final proof for Gene, who right after he publicized his success. Now let's backtrack a little bit. Remember when I told you guys earlier that Gene had a habit of writing down another victory, another win, before he monitored it and seen exactly where it was going to go and if it was going to be a win or not? Okay, he did that in this case too. Okay, now let's go on. Now, Maury and his wife eventually returned to their modest home. Okay, eventually returned to their modest home, but Perrine, which is Maury's wife, soon found out that her husband's newfound calmness. Okay, remember, so when she found out, Perrine found out that her husband was kidnapped off the streets of Paris, and this and that he was going to, that this transfusion was happening to him. She was initially confused and not 100% on board, but they said, but it's going to go ahead and it's going to take away the mental illness, so he's not going to be out screaming in the streets anymore, pretty much. So, she became with it because she wanted a form of her husband either back or now, rather, that she could, that take the crazy away, keep the man. Pretty much, that's what she was getting at, okay? So anyways, but soon she found out that her husband's newfound calmness was only temporary, okay? Now, the first time that they had got Maury and they kidnapped him and they transfused him, he was good. Like, he was seemingly sane, seemingly normal, but only for 2 months, right? Only for 2 months. The man's state of health and mind changed abruptly due to his binges. So reports are alleging and assuming that because Maury started doing things like he started binge drinking, he started a lot of tobacco and alcohol. The reports suggest that he started having a lot of strong water. Y'all light up the comments if y'all know what that strong water is, okay? But anyways, strong water is really just alcohol. In this day and time, we would probably consider it something really strong like vodka or whiskey, or, just like whatever you guys consider like really strong alcohol. He started drinking a lot of stuff like that, right? And in no time, the man's madness was not only back, but it had worsened. Now, remember how I told you guys that Maury was hollering in the streets before and showing out? Okay, well, if you thought that was bad, then, he was taking it up a notch. So instead of just hollering in the streets, now he was probably kicking and punching in the streets too, because it had made him completely nutty by this time, right? Okay. Now, so Gene, he actually performed a second transfusion, which diminished the delirium, okay, but it had other major side effects, right? So now, based on the second transfusion, Maury wasn't, kicking and punching in the streets. He had calmed down, but it had other side effects like, things like vicious diarrhea, or, unable to sleep, or unable to eat, or overeating, or, just anything that you guys can think of that would like really turn up and be like, okay, this is too extreme. I can't do this, right? He started experiencing stuff like that, okay? Now, the third and last transfusion performed on Maury happened under major pressure of the wife. In fact, Gene, the scientist who had been given all these transfusions, he was against it. So the wife, Perrine, goes to Gene and says, you gotta do another transfusion, because before he was calm, and then after he was calm, it only lasted a little while longer. You guys did the second thing, and then he was calm and he went basically all out crazy in the streets, kicking and punching and stuff like that. You guys gotta help. You gotta get in there. You gotta do something else. But when she was petitioning for them to do something else, Gene, at this point, the scientist who originally started all this, he was like, he knew that his research, there you go, that his research really wasn't where it should have been. He knows that he really didn't have factual evidence and proof at this time, and nothing of longevity. So at that time, Gene, he knew that he didn't have anything that could substantiate the facts based behind the longevity of how long the success would be for these blood transfusion with human to animal, from animal blood to human body. He knew that, right? So when Perrine came to him saying, you got to do it again, he really, he wasn't really on board to do that, okay? But she kept pressuring him, okay? But a side note for me is, curious why Maury's wife, Perrine, would insist on yet another transfusion when the others were not 100% successful. Remember, he already had two. The guy was going through it. We know he was mentally ill, but he was clearly going through it at this point, okay? The sweating, the vomiting, the vicious diarrhea, the delirium where he's out punching in the street, you know? He's doing all this stuff. He can't sleep. He's having nightmares. You know, he thinks he's another person. I mean, it was pretty bad, you guys. I mean, really bad. So you would think if somebody loved him, they would say, you know what? I don't want my husband tortured anymore. You guys will never touch him again. I don't want him in pain, because I think I probably would have stepped up likely and be like, hell no, you guys are not doing anything else to my husband. Whatever was done in the past, I'll have to go see another specialist or somebody else to see if they can help with it. Y'all light up the comments and let me know y'all thoughts. Now, during the procedure, Maury's body, at a certain point, so that this is the third procedure, okay? So during the procedure, Maury's body at a certain point shook in a violent fit. Okay, to which the men decided to end the transfusion. Okay, so Jean decided to honor the wife's request for a third transfusion, and during that transfusion, Maury's body started shaking so violently. It was horrible. It started shaking so violently that it's just like he was having a seizure. Ultimately, okay, he was having a seizure. It was bad. Nothing was going as planned. Nothing was going as expected. So the scientists and the doctors, you know, they looked at him and they said, you know what? We've taken our hands off of this. We're not finishing this. We are done, okay? We're done with the transfusion. So they told Maury, you go home and you come back the next day. We'll finish it off the next day. Let's see, maybe your body needs some rest. So Maury went home, but he was never going to return, because the very next day, Maury died. So recalling the various details of the transfusion, it was clear that the death had not been caused by the transfusion. This is what, so after Maury died, right? Jean and his team, they asked if they can do an autopsy of his body to try to pinpoint exactly what point was too much for him and exactly what point caused all the aggravation to where he died, right? But the other medical and scientific community, they were against it. They said, no, you cannot do an autopsy on him, right? Because they wanted to see exactly what happened. Now, suspicious enough and curious enough, the person who was the biggest advocate for the scientists not to do an autopsy on the body was Perrine. Now, Perrine is Maury's wife, okay? She was the #1 advocate saying, you guys will not touch him. You will not do an autopsy. You will not figure out what happened. But she's the very person who begged for the third transfusion. Y'all following the story? How y'all think this finna end up? Okay, let's wrap it up. So, recalling the various details of the transfusion, it was clear that the cause of death was not the transfusion. The scientists said they were getting ready to give him the transfusion, but they did not. They said no blood on the third time had actually been transfused into Maury, and the calf had not even been cut open, and because the seizure started. So because the seizure started, they backed away from that. They said, no, we don't, hands off. We're not doing anything because he started having seizures, right? So Jean, you know, and Emerez, they were the two scientific and medical community who said they wanted to do an autopsy on Maury's body, but Perrine said no way. So the outcome was a subsequent trial in which Jean was found not responsible for the death. So they had a trial with Jean. They said, okay, we have to figure out what happened here. Okay, you claim to be a scientist, you're running around, poking around with these animals and these people. We need to see what's going on. They had a trial. Long story short, they said he's not guilty. They said because Maury did not die from the transfusion. He did not, right? So what we're looking at here is 2 seemingly successful transfusions have taken place, but the third try was so bad that Jean and his team had to stop before it was even complete. Keep that in mind, right? Now, arsenic, a known poison, was the culprit, not that transfusion. It was later determined, guys, that the competing surgeons had helped Maury's wife poison him to discredit the medical experience that Jean had done. Did you guys catch that? So this whole time, we're going through these experiments, we're going through the tests, and everybody thinks it's the transfusion that's causing all the damage and all the pain and the severity of everything. But long story short, it absolutely was not. Maury's wife, Perrine, she started talking to the opposite medical community, right? So it's like if it's Planet Tide's medical community over here and we're innovative, we're go-getters, we're trying these things, we're experimenting, we got wins, we're counting real wins though, right? And then over here, the other people called, you know, the L's, the ones who take the L's, whoever they are, right? They're over here, they looking at me, they want to get down, they want to do what I do, but they don't know how to do what I do. okay? They want to be a part of the community. They are a part of the medical community, just not my medical community. You guys see what I'm saying? And so they want to experiment like me, but they feel like, you know, she's the pioneer. She already started it first. So we got to figure out a way to take down everything she's done and she's built already, so she seems less credible, right? So what they did is they concocted a plan, and they start talking to Perrine, which was Maury's wife, and they actually poisoned Maury. Okay, Perrine and the competitors of the medical community, they poisoned Maury. So when he was having those seizures, it was a result of the poisoning arsenic that they had given to him. That's actually how he died, which means he was ultimately murdered. Okay, but the French court, right? So the French court, they didn't know all this stuff happened. It wasn't, come to find out, it wasn't even found out that Maury was murdered until like a decade after it even happened. Nobody knew besides Perrine and the opposing medical community, right? But the French court banned transfusions all the same. They banned it. So that's it. Crazy man, no crazy man. We're not having this blood on our hands. It is banned, right? For some, the risk that science could create monsters or worse, corrupt the entire human race with foreign blood was simply too much to bear, okay? Jean Baptiste Denys, he died October the 3rd, 1704. Excuse me. All right, everyone, that's all that I have for you guys today, and I hope that you guys have enjoyed it. Thank you guys so much for rocking with me. If you guys would like to connect with me, my contact information can be found in the description. So like I always say, there's always another story to be told. But for now,